A quiet story of love lost and trust rebuilt on the American frontier, where a returned ring, a letter, and an unexpected knock at the door changed the course of one man's winter forever. The ring came back in a square of plain cloth, tied neat as a seed pouch. John found it waiting on the table when he came in from the barn, frost still in his beard, the smell of horse sweat clinging to his coat. A short note lay beside it, folded once, the script small and careful. He did not open it right away. He took off his gloves first, shook out the cold, and let the quiet of the house decide whether it wanted to hear the words. He had bought the ring in Laramie the spring before, a small piece of gold traded for after a season's worth of hauling freight through wet passes. It had cost him the use of his right knee for 3 weeks, but at the time, it had felt worth it. Mary had smiled when she tried it on, said it caught the light the way the creek did at sundown. Now the gold sat dull in his palm. He read the note at the table, lips hardly moving. "I am sorry, John. I cannot keep it. I am needed elsewhere." That was all. No signature, though the handwriting was hers. He folded the paper once more, slipped it beneath the oilcloth, and stared through the frost-rimmed window at the barn lantern still burning faintly in daylight. A man learned to live with what left him, or he didn't live long. Outside, the snow kept toying with the wind. He stepped out, pulled the barn door half shut to keep the mare from nosing through the feed sacks, and started cleaning tack that did not need cleaning. His hands needed something to do. By afternoon, he had split enough kindling for a week. The quiet began to settle in his bones, steady, predictable, like winter chores. He warmed coffee on the stove, not because he wanted it, but because that's what a man did when there was nothing else to fix. Toward dusk, he heard the crunch of hooves on the frozen path. Visitors came seldom this far up the ridge in winter. He wiped his hands, stepped onto the porch, and saw a figure riding slow through the dusk. The scarf and small frame told him before the face did. It was Clara, Mary's younger sister. She dismounted stiffly, cheeks raw from cold. "Evening, John." Her voice carried that mix of courtesy and fatigue that sounded like both greeting and apology. "Evening," he said. "You're far from town." "Lost my place," she answered, tying the reins to the post. "They hired a cousin instead. I figured maybe you had work to trade. Not charity, work." He studied her face. Same gray eyes as Mary's, but steadier somehow. "There's always work. Not much worth the ride in this weather." "I can cook, mend, help with stock," she said. "I don't want to be beholden, just the roof and a bit to eat." He nodded once, not trusting speech to carry what needed saying. "You'll find a place here, then," he said after a moment, stove still warm. Inside, she unwound her scarf, setting it by the fire. The smell of cold wool and trail dust filled the cabin, somehow sharper than grief. She looked around at the spare order of his life. Tools lined by the door, 2 plates, 1 chair slightly polished by habit. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. "You're not," he answered. "The storm will be worse tonight." She nodded, and that settled it. After supper, silence took its proper seat between them. The wind rose, brushing at the shutters like an animal seeking warmth. John watched the firelight climb the chimney bricks, slow and steady. She sat across from him, darning a glove with neat, practiced stitches. Mary wrote. She said quietly, eyes on her work. He didn't answer, though the note under the oilcloth seemed to stir. She said she wasn't coming back, thought you should know it from kin. "I know," he said. "The letter said enough." "I'm sorry, John. She was always restless. Never could stand still long enough to take root." He half smiled, though it felt like a borrowed expression. Roots take time. Some folks don't wait for spring. For a while there was only the fire, the ticking of the old clock, and the wind testing the seams of the house. Later, when he showed her the small spare room, once meant for company, rarely used, she paused at the doorway. "I'll earn my keep," she said again. "I reckon you will," he replied. "Sleep comes easier when a person's tired enough." She gave a faint smile. "Then tomorrow I'll be plenty rested to start." He left her there, closing the door softly. In his own room, he set the ring on the mantel where moonlight would find it. Snowlight seeped through the curtains, pale as breath. The little gold band glinted once before the clouds covered the moon. He lay down without undressing much, boots still near the stove, coat over the chair. Sleep came slow but sure. Out here, grief worked the body like any other labor. It tired you until you had no choice but to rest. Sometime near midnight, a sound pulled him halfway awake. Not the wind, a soft knock. Twice, measured, uncertain. He rose, took the lamp, and opened the door. Clara stood there again, shawl drawn close, eyes wide, not with fear but resolve. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Didn't mean to wake you. The window rattled loose in my room. Thought I'd ask for a nail." He fetched one from the small tin on the shelf, along with the hammer. "Storm's building," he said. She nodded. "I heard. Thank you." He watched her go down the hall, lamplight tracing her shadow along the wall. The sound of the hammer was small but steady, like a heartbeat, trying to remember its rhythm. When it stopped, he sat by the fire again, half awake, thinking not of what had ended, but of what still asked to begin. Outside, the wind turned the snow sideways against the windows, as if the night itself meant to stay a while. Dawn came late behind the storm, the light thin as skimmed milk. John woke to the smell of coffee and the small, clean sound of a broom tapping the hearthstones. Clara had the stove open a notch and the kettle muttering. Her hair was pinned up under a plain kerchief. She moved the broom without fuss, the way a person thinks through their hands. "Morning," he said, pulling on his boots. "Morning," she answered, not looking up. "I found the flour tin. You keep it where any sane person would." "That's rare praise around here," he said. The joke landed easy enough. He took it as a good sign. She poured coffee into the blue cup with the nicked rim, the one he favored in winter because the chip fit his thumb. "I've got an oatmeal cake started," she said. "Dry as trail bread if you let it, decent if you eat it warm. Stock first." "Barn first," he agreed. They reached for their coats at the same time, then stepped back to avoid knocking elbows. The brief stumble made them both smile without showing teeth. Outside, the snow was a crusted sheet, clean as paper. The mare snorted in her stall, impatient. John forked hay, checked hooves for ice balls, ran a hand along the flanks for heat. Clara hauled water like she had done it all her life, careful to keep the slosh off her skirts. Her breath rose straight in the still air, a thin ghost that disappeared as soon as it noticed itself. "You do, Barnes," he said, "for someone who lost a town job." She wedged the bucket and wiped the rim with a rag. Town doesn't have a corner on competence, no heat in it, just a fact placed gently on the table. By the time they came back inside, the oatmeal cake had set, and the stove was throwing a reliable warmth. She cut it in squares with the back of a knife. He ate his leaning against the counter, same as a dozen mornings before. Only the quiet felt different, less of a vacancy, more of a pause before speech. "I'm not here to be taken care of," she said finally, watching steam drift from her cup. "We ought to set terms so neither of us has to pretend anything." "Say them," he said. He needed lines he could tow to, lines steady to winter. "I'll keep the house, help with the stock, sew and mend. We'll take in work if it comes. I keep half of whatever I earn with my needle, and I won't be paid for cooking what I eat." She took a breath. "If I leave what's yours as you found it. If I stay through thaw, we can revisit." He nodded, slow. "In return, my roof and food, no questions that aren't work questions. You get the small room. I won't put you in a position to be talked about." He glanced at the narrow hallway, at the door with the loosened latch. "We'll keep doors open when it's just the two of us in a room. We'll keep a ledger. Money's honest when it's written down." "That suits me," she said. "Thought I'd suggest something else, too." "What's that?" "Teamsters come off the ridge hungry. If a pot was on Wednesdays and Saturdays, nothing fancy, just stew and bread. They'd pay a nickel and call it salvation. You have the yard for a wagon or two to stand while steam leaves the horses." He pictured it, wet coats steaming by the rail, spoons tapping enameled bowls, the brief, contented quiet a hot meal brings a tired man. "We'd need beef, potatoes, flour." "I can stretch a bone farther than a sermon," she said. Dry humor folded itself under the words. "We start small. We stop if it proves foolish. You take the wood and water, I take the cooking and washing up. Profit splits down the middle." "Fair," he said. He liked that she said profit, not blessing. It put the matter in his hands. He went to the cupboard and took down the ledger. Brown cover, pages lined by a steady hand, entries neat as fence posts. He turned to a fresh page, dipped the pen, and wrote the date. "Terms," he said, and repeated them as he wrote. She watched, nodding where a word needed to be right. When he finished, he slid the book toward her. "Do I sign?" she asked. "If you're willing." She took the pen and wrote Clara plain, then added her last name small beside it, as if not to crowd the page. He signed under it. The black ink looked older than a minute. They kept busy. Busy kept a person from thinking crooked. John stretched harness with saddle soap, mended a cracked singletree with an iron strap that had waited a month for attention. Clara scrubbed the table with hot water and ash, then set to mending a coat whose pockets bore more story than use. The house took on that sound winter homes do, low work noises and the occasional clink that says tasks are turning like gear teeth. Near noon they heard bells down the track. Bells meant William, who liked to keep his mare merry so she didn't sulk under a light load. Sure enough, William's red scarf showed between the spruces. Then the man himself, cheeks wide, with cold. He stamped snow off at the door. "You two up and made something smell proper," he said, sniffing like a hunter. "Am I early for supper by 6 hours?" "You're early for everything," John said. He poured coffee. William took it with thanks, warming his hands around the tin cup like it meant July in there. William's wife, Margaret, came behind him on a sled, piled round with town parcels, bundled in sackcloth. She waved from the path and didn't come in. Margaret preferred to keep to the air unless the business was hers. "Brought you a letter with the flour," William said, easing into the chair nearest the stove. "Came on the morning stage yesterday. From Cheyenne, looks like." Clara didn't turn her head. She kept mending, the needle steady as a pulse. John took the envelope and did not open it. "You hauled all the way up here to be mail?" he asked. "That, and to see whether the wind took your roof," William said. "Snow cut a drift across the creek road. Looks like a white ox sleeping there." He sipped. "Margaret figures the ridge men will be glad enough for a hot pot if someone sets one in the middle of the week." "Sounds like Margaret," Clara said, the corner of her mouth thinking about a smile. "We thought to try it Saturdays as well." "Do that, and you'll have half the valley asking for seconds," William said. "We'll spread the word." In the doorway, Margaret called, "Spread the word, yes. Gossip, no." Her voice held that mild iron some women carry like another shawl. William stood, tugged his cap. Mind yourselves, both. It's winter, and winter listens. He went out, and the bells moved away into the slow sound a sled makes. When the door closed, John turned the envelope over in his hands as if testing a tool he suspected. It did not rattle. It had weight, only because letters always did. He set it on the mantel and left it there. The day already held enough words. They worked until their breath rose indoors, and the windows filmed at the edges. By late afternoon, the stew had become deliberate and honest. Onions, salt, a strip of beef that made itself larger by will and water. Clara baked biscuits with a heavy hand that would soften as she learned the temperament of his flour. He made a sign from a split board. Hot noon, WEDSAT. He carved the letters slow with a carpenter's knife so the blade would not slip and change noon to moon, which seemed too fine a promise. Just after dark, another knock came, this one quick and apologetic. John opened the door to a man and a boy, both glazed with snow, a team behind them breathing in plumes. The man tipped his hat at Clara by habit, apology in the set of his shoulders. "Frank," John said, "you lost the Creek Road?" "Creek Road lost itself," Frank said, shrugging snow from his coat. "We need a corner of barn and a bite of something that smells like what I smell." "We have stew," Clara said. "You'll pay a nickel if you have it. If not, you'll pay when you do." Frank grinned, relief plain as a sunrise. "We have it." The boy looked maybe 12, hat too big for his ears. He held his arms stiff, afraid any move might show he did not know where to put them. "This is George," Frank said. "His ma's gone on ahead to her sister's, and I agreed to see him as far as Birch. Then the road forgot its name." "We have room," John said. "Stall for two and a corner of hay. Boy can sleep by the stove if he's quiet." "I can be quiet," George said, then looked like he wished the sentence had cost him fewer words. Clara ladled stew without comment. She set 2 bowls on the table and pulled a bench near so the boy would understand the invitation. Frank ate the way men eat who had been holding themselves upright by will. George watched the steam first, then lifted the spoon with both hands. He blew, patient because someone had taught him to be. When they were halfway through, George pulled an envelope from inside his coat. It had creases like a map. "I was told to give you this," he said, eyes on his bowl. "A lady at the stage said if I was anywhere near the ridge with Frank, to ask if Mr. John would take it from me." John took the envelope and recognized the hand that had jerked his heart once already that day. He said nothing. He set it beside the other on the mantel, a matched pair, and did not look to see if Clara noticed. After the bowls were clean and the team seen to, Frank showed his hands, calloused and apologetic, and offered to split wood. John nodded and handed him the maul. Men preferred to pay fast for grace. While the steady thud of split oak marked the dark, Clara found George an old quilt. She folded it once more, so the worn places would hide inside. "You any good at mending harness?" she asked him, not unkindly. "Some," he said. "Ma says I'm good at seeing where things rub wrong." "That's most of mending," she said. "Tomorrow I'll show you the harness John fixed today. You can say whether it will last a thaw." George nodded, shoulders easing. Boys like to be consulted where they won't be mocked. When they finally had the house to themselves again, John stood by the mantel. Clara was washing the last bowl, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands red and capable. Steam moved along her forearms like a faint veil. "Do you want me to step out while you read?" she asked, drying the bowl. "I'll read them when I can use what's inside," he said. "Tonight I'm tired enough to be honest." She nodded once. The light through the stovepipe collar threw a slow pulse against the ceiling. They were 2 people who had agreed on work. The rest could wait. Snow held all night like a held breath and let go by morning. The road showed no wagon marks, only the memory of them. Frank left at first light, George small on the sled behind him, hat pulled down with new confidence because he had slept by a fire and been asked a question. Around noon, Margaret appeared again, this time with a purpose that made the cold follow her in. "A word," she said to Clara, then to John, "and one for you separate if you'll hear it." Clara wiped her hands and stepped into the small room with Margaret. The door stayed not quite shut, as if to nod at the rules they'd set between them. John stayed by the stove and did not listen, though sound had its own will. He heard boarding house, and safe, and talk, and then nothing but the low murmur of two women who had paid different prices to stand on their own feet. When they came back to the kitchen, Clara's face was its usual blank paper with a thin line drawn for the mouth. Margaret's face was a question she had already answered. "They're offering me work," Clara said. "At the boarding house. Beds and biscuits. It would be inside, paid in money, not stew." John nodded. "Good," he said, though his chest took that small surprised ache a picked scab does. "You should do what keeps you right with yourself." Margaret looked from one to the other. "There's talk, of course," she said, gentle like a blanket placed right. "You can't stop talk, but you can set it straight. If you two are keeping a house through winter, write it down as you've done, and have it witnessed. That way, when spring burns the snow off the fence posts, what's honest will still be honest." "We signed a ledger," John said. "Then let someone else sign the margin," Margaret said. "It costs nothing but a minute and saves a mile of explaining." She left them with that practical mercy in a shawl. When the door closed, silence sat down again, this time a little closer. "You want the boarding house?" John said. Clara looked at her hands. "I want a thing I can stand on," she said. "This is that, for now. But if I take it, I leave you short, and I quit the bargain we set this very morning. That sits wrong with me. We set the bargain to make room for work, not to trap ourselves," he said. He meant it, though the way his mouth shaped the words reminded him how unused he was to saying things that touched his own comfort. She shook her head slightly. "It would be a stitch pulled before the seam's set. I hate that feeling." He thought of the sign on the bench, the letters still throwing sawdust from their edges. He thought of Saturday, and a pot, and the way a man eats when a bowl tells him he's seen. He thought of the pair of envelopes on the mantel, heavy as keys that open nothing. He took the ledger and set it on the table again. "Let's add a line," he said. "If either of us is offered better work, we'll say so and finish the week we're in. Saturdays we try the stew. We'll keep the doors open. We'll keep the neighbors informed. And if anyone asks, we'll show them this page. We'll ask William and Margaret to sign the margin." She read the new words as he wrote them. When he slid the pen across, she signed with a firmness that put backbone in the paper. "I'll stay through Saturday, then," she said. "And we'll see." They took the ledger to Williams that afternoon, the sled whispering over packed snow, the sky the odd blue you only get when wind has polished it clean. William signed with flourish, Margaret with a sober hand. Joseph, an older neighbor with a beard like a sagebrush, added his name for good measure without looking to see whether his opinion had been requested. "If it's written and witnessed, it's true enough for winter," Joseph said, "and winter's when truth matters." On the way back, a crow paced them along the fence, hopping from post to post as if counting. John watched it and waited for the thought that was trying to find him. It came simple as a proverb. A bargain, kept in the open, has fewer shadows. They hung the sign Friday at dusk, the letters dark against fresh planed wood, the words, "Hot Noon, WEDSAT," looking both ordinary and brave. The first Saturday brought 3 men, then 7, then two more who smelled the steam from the road and followed their noses like faithful dogs. Clara dipped stew like a small ceremony, ladle steady, eye quick to see whose bowl was low. John kept wood and water where they were needed, and said the kind of words that fill spaces without clamor. There you are. Mind the rim, it's hot. Plenty more if you've got a nickel that wants to be thinner. Money clinked in the small tin Clara kept near the flour. Not much, but not nothing. Men mentioned patches that needed doing, seams that needed coaxing, shirts that needed to forget the shape of the man who had worn them last. Work begets work if you show up clean and humble. By late afternoon, when the last spoon had scraped the last bowl and the last man had put his hat back on with that reluctant tilt that says thank you louder than words, Clara sat. She didn't flop. She yielded to the chair like a field gives to rain. John brought her the last biscuit and half a cup of coffee and set both where her hand would find them without looking. "Boarding house won't work you less," he said. "It'll work me different," she said. "Here, the work answers to names I know." They didn't say more. Tired people guard their words like matches. But the room held a small, satisfied thrum, like a violin string after the bow has lifted. That evening, when the house had gone quiet and the road had taken back its silence, another knock came. Gentle, 3 small taps, polite, the way a person knocks when they carry something they will not put down without permission. John opened to find a woman he did not recognize, older than Clara by a decade, hat pins straight, jaw set like a person who had learned in a dozen kitchens how to set a room before she entered it. "Elizabeth," she said when he didn't ask. "I came from town. I keep a place near the church. I have a letter for you that should be delivered by my hand." She held out the envelope like a summons and a blessing both. "And I have a request for the ring, if you're of a mind to hear it." Clara stood behind him, and he could feel, not see, the way she straightened like a hitching post setting its foot in frost. The wind moved around them, curious. "Come in," he said. He stepped aside because a person with sense doesn't make a woman speak important words on a porch in winter. "There's a chair by the stove." She sat, ungloved, palms red with cold honesty. "Mary's gone on to Cheyenne," she said, not unkind. "She left this with me to be proper." She placed the letter in his hand. "She asks whether you might send the ring to a mission woman." She sat, ungloved, palms red with cold honesty. "Mary's gone on to Cheyenne," she said, not unkind. "She left this with me to be proper." She placed the letter in his hand. "She asks whether you might send the ring to a mission woman who knows where it's needed. Or if you'd rather, give it to your own neighbor in trouble. She writes that she has no right to keep it as a promise, and every right to hope it does some good." Clara did not move or speak. Her stillness felt like respect for a clean cut. John looked at the letter and then at the small gold band winking dull on the mantel. The edges of his choice were plain. He could clutch a broken promise until it sharpened his grasp, or he could let the metal do some work under a new sun. He had no taste for keepsakes that kept nothing. "I'll give it to where it's needed," he said. "There's a family on the low bend lost a winter cow. They'll manage, but not well. They need a stove lip mended and a new blanket more than they need my pride." Elizabeth's shoulders dropped half an inch, the measure of approval a practical woman offers. "Then I'll take it by tomorrow," she said. "And I'll return with a receipt you can keep in your ledger, so Winter remembers your choice when Talk forgets it." He rubbed his thumb against the ring, feeling the small warmth that had gathered from the mantel. "That suits," he said. "Another thing," Elizabeth added, eyes flicking to Clara with no shame and no challenge. "If the two of you mean to share work through winter, you'll want your names straight with the town. Come Sunday, put yourselves in a pew. People see a face in public, they fret less about what they imagine in private." "Thank you," Clara said. "We'll come if the road permits." Elizabeth rose, gloves in her hand. "It always permits something," she said, and that, too, felt like the kind of proverb working women are allowed to write. She nodded to the kettle's steady breath. "Good stew smell. Keep at it." When the door shut behind her, the house took a long, slow breath. John set the ring on the table between them. "Plain bargain," Clara said. "It keeps paying out." He nodded. "It does." He tucked the ring into the ledger like a pressed leaf and closed both with care. The 2 earlier envelopes stayed on the mantel, Elizabeth's. He set aside to answer in person. Outside, the sky deepened to a dark that was not empty, but full of small, hard stars. Somewhere down the road, bells shook, and it sounded like agreement. If you've been listening a while, this is a good moment to stretch your shoulders and sip some water. There's more work to set, and choices yet to tally. They banked the fire, they set the chairs where they had been. They left the door to the hallway open the width of a hand, because they were people who had said they would. And when the wind pressed at the house again, it found fewer gaps than before. The next morning broke clear, sun cutting bright through the window frost. John woke to the smell of cornmeal frying and the low hum of Clara's voice, half song, half habit. It wasn't a tune he knew, but it worked on the house the way warm air works on ice, softening edges. He stepped out, tugging his suspenders. "You're early to it," he said. "Habit," she answered. "If I wake before light, I may as well do something that makes light welcome." They ate without hurry. Outside, the snow crusted hard enough to walk on top. John carried water, the pails squealing in his grip. Clara came behind with a small basket, scattering crumbs to the hens that survived the freeze. It was plain work, and plain work steadies the heart. At noon he hitched the sled. They had stew left and biscuits wrapped in cloth. "Road's clear enough," he said. "Elizabeth will be expecting the ring." Clara tied her scarf. "Then we'll take it proper." The sled runners whispered across the snow. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke from distant chimneys. They passed a frozen creek where a crow picked at something too thin to feed on. Clara watched it, then said, "Strange thing. You can give everything you have and still be hungry." He nodded, not sure whether she meant herself, the crow, or the letter still unread in his coat pocket. At Elizabeth's place, they found her outside, chopping kindling with efficient strokes. She stopped, leaning on the axe handle. "Brought it then?" John handed her the ring and its bit of cloth. "As promised, for the family near the bend." Elizabeth took it, eyes softening. "It'll keep a stove lit, I reckon." "Mary'll be glad to know it did something honest." Clara helped her stack the wood. Women worked side by side as if they'd done so for years. No wasted motion, no false cheer. Elizabeth watched her once, then said to John quietly, "You've got good company. Don't spoil it by waiting for words that don't come." "I'm learning," he said. They rode back slow. The afternoon light stretched long across the ridge, gold fading to the thin blue that warns of night. Near home, they saw smoke from a sled camp farther down the slope, Frank again and the boy George. The team was half buried in drift. "Hold up," John called. He jumped off, boots breaking crust. Frank waved weakly from the wagon bed. "Axle pin snapped," he said. "Been patching with wire since morning." John fetched his own tool roll. "We'll splice it." He glanced at Clara. "Bring blankets from the sled. Get the boy warmed." She moved quick, efficient, no fuss. George's face thawed pink again under the quilt. She pressed a cup of broth to his hands. "Sip. Don't rush. Warmth works slow." Frank watched her a long moment. "You keep luck about you," he said to John. "Ought to hold it close." They mended the axle as the sun went. By lanternlight the pin held. Frank clapped John's shoulder. "You've earned your supper twice over. Come down to Birch when thaw comes. There'll be beer enough to remember it." When they turned toward home, Clara's voice was quiet. "You didn't hesitate." "Couldn't let them freeze. Most would have thought first about the light going out." He shrugged. "Light'll wait if a man's worth his salt." Inside, the fire greeted them with its small applause. The stew was thin but hot. They ate in companionable silence. When the bowls were empty, John reached into his coat and took down the 2 unopened letters from the mantel. "I think it's time," he said. She didn't move closer, only set her hands on the table as if anchoring herself. He opened the first. The handwriting wavered like someone writing on a train. "John, forgive the manner of my leaving. I was never built for stillness. You offered me a life, and I mistook it for a cage. I hope you find warmth somewhere that stays." The second was shorter. "If you see Clara, tell her she was always the stronger sister. Tell her to build something that doesn't need me to bless it." He folded both, placed them by the fire, and let the flames take them one line at a time. "That's the last of that," he said. Clara watched the paper curl. "She wasn't wrong," she murmured. "About which part?" "About me being the stronger one. I just didn't know it yet." He met her eyes. "You do now?" "I think so. Strength isn't loud. It just doesn't quit." Snow began again, soft flakes whispering against the window. He stirred the fire. "Saturday's stew will bring more men. We'll need more bowls. I'll borrow a mold from Elizabeth. She likes to lend what she knows will come back clean." A quiet fell, the easy kind that doesn't need sweeping away. She mended a shirt. He whittled a peg for the barn door. The small sounds fit together like parts of a single breath. After a while she said, "When spring comes, I may go to Birch. The boarding house still stands, and they'll need steady hands. But maybe I'll come back Saturdays, if that suits." "It suits," he said. "Road'll be clear by then." She smiled, faint but sure. "You talk like a man who intends the road to stay open." He looked out at the snow, at the long ridge the light was leaving. "It's all anyone can do. Keep a path visible long enough for another person to follow." The next morning brought a sun so bright it hurt the eyes. The thaw had begun. The faint drip of meltwater from eaves, the slow trickle carving tiny channels in the yard. They stacked wood higher, fixed the fence where ice had bowed it. Life began its quiet argument with winter's hold. Saturday came again, and with it more boots at the door. Word had traveled faster than wind. Teamsters, widows, a trapper with one good leg, all found their way to the stew pot. Clara greeted each with the same plain kindness, ladle moving like a steady clock. John poured coffee, took coins, fixed a latch that stuck. When the pot ran empty, one man said, "If there's a next week, I'll bring my wife. She says kindness can be tasted if the salt's right." "There'll be a next week," John said. "The salt's right." That night, when they closed the shutters, Clara looked around the small room. The table, the ledger, the faint smell of onions and wood smoke that meant effort turned to comfort. "This started with a returned ring," she said. "And ended with a good meal," he answered. She laughed softly. "That's near enough to happiness." He nodded, thoughtful. "Happiness comes in bowls, not promises." She reached for her shawl, pausing at the door of her room. "Then I hope we never run out of bowls." When she'd gone, John sat a long while, watching the fire settle to coals. The sound of her footsteps faded, but something in the house stayed alert, the sense of two people not yet done with kindness. He banked the fire low, stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars sharp as new nails. The wind had softened. carrying a promise of change that didn't need to speak loud to be believed. Inside, the ledger lay open to their signatures, ink-brown but firm. He touched the margin where Elizabeth's name curved in witness and closed it gently. The ring was gone, but something heavier and better had taken its place, a kind of trust shaped by work, not vows. He turned down the lamp. The house held its warmth. Tomorrow would need more wood, more water, more patience. He found himself glad for it. Spring came quiet that year, almost apologetic. The snow didn't melt so much as withdraw. Day by day, step by careful step, like a visitor who knew it had stayed long enough. Mud took its place, then grass, then the shy pulse of green along the fence line. John kept to his work, but the rhythm had changed. Saturdays no longer felt like waiting. They felt like purpose. The stew pot had become part of the Ridge's calendar, as sure as planting or rain. Travelers knew where warmth lived, and they brought stories that left traces in the room long after the boots were gone. Clara took the boarding house post come May, but returned often, sometimes on foot, sometimes behind William's wagon. Each visit began the same. She'd hang her shawl by the door, check the stove, taste the broth, and say, "Need salt." He'd grin, pass her the tin, and let her find the balance. One evening near midsummer, she brought word that Mary had sent a parcel from Cheyenne, a loaf of sweet bread and a note that simply read, "For what was mended." They shared it with whoever happened to be there. When dusk fell, John stepped outside, the porch boards warm under his boots. Fireflies blinked over the pasture like slow forgiveness. He thought of rings and letters and bargains kept, of how some things don't end. They just turn honest. "Road's clear," Clara called from the doorway. "You coming in?" He smiled into the dark. "Soon enough." The wind carried the smell of stew and spring grass, a small, faithful promise worth keeping.